The day I got the call saying I no longer had a job was the same day my sister was driving the car I helped her get. I remember standing in the parking lot outside my office building, holding a box of my desk things, watching the afternoon sky like it owed me an explanation. My phone buzzed. It was not a message of support. It was my mother, asking if I had remembered to send my sister the insurance card information she needed. Not a single word about what had just happened to me. Not one question about whether I was okay. I had just lost the only stable thing in my life because of a chain of events that started the moment I said yes to helping my sister, and my own family did not even notice I was standing in the rubble. That was the moment I understood something I had spent years refusing to accept. I was not the daughter they worried about. I was the daughter they used. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something honestly. If the people who were supposed to have your back were the ones holding the knife, how long would you have stayed quiet? Think about that as you listen to everything Lousia went through, because this story is going to ask you that question more than once. My name is Lousia. I was 31 years old when my life came apart at the seams, and I was 32 when I finally stopped sewing it back together for everyone else's benefit. I want to tell you exactly what happened, from the beginning, because the beginning matters. The beginning is where the patterns started, and patterns are the kinds of things you only see clearly once you stop standing inside them. I grew up in a house where love was distributed unevenly, and everyone pretended that was not happening. My parents were not cruel people. They were not monsters. They were simply people who, somewhere along the way, decided that my younger sister Priya needed more. More attention, more patience, more rescue, more second chances. And because I was the older one, because I was the one who got good grades without being pushed and kept my room clean without being reminded and held down part-time jobs while still in school without being asked, they stopped looking my way with any urgency. I was fine. Lousia was always fine. Lousia could handle it. Lousia did not need the same level of hands-on care. What they did not understand, or maybe chose not to understand, was that fine is not the same as not hurting. Fine is just what you become when you learn that asking for help costs more than doing it yourself. Priya was 26 when this story really begins. She was sweet in the way that people are sweet when they have never fully had to face consequences. She laughed easily, charmed people quickly, and moved through the world with a confidence that comes not from earning things, but from always having someone available to catch you. She had started and stopped 2 different college programs. She had moved in and out of our parents' house 3 times in 4 years. She had borrowed money from nearly every person in our immediate family and paid back almost none of it, not because she could not, but because it was always easier to borrow more than to return what she already had. I knew all of this. I had watched it for years, and I had quietly helped cover for her more times than I can now count with a straight face. At 31, I was working as a senior coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company. I had been there for 5 years. I had a solid reputation, a small but clean apartment I rented on my own, and a growing savings account that I had built dollar by careful dollar because nobody handed me anything, and I had learned early that security comes from what you build yourself. I was not rich, but I was stable. I was proud of my stability. I had earned every piece of it. My relationship at the time was with a man named Derek. We had been together for about 2 years. He was kind, steady, and supportive. He was the kind of person who showed up. Our relationship was good, not perfect, but genuinely good. We were talking seriously about our future, about eventually finding a place together, about the next chapter. I had real reasons to feel hopeful about where my life was heading. Then the phone call came from my mother. It was a Wednesday evening in late spring. I had just gotten home from work, made myself a simple dinner, and was sitting down to actually relax for once. My mother's voice on the phone was warm in the way it always got when she needed something from me. She had a particular kind of warmth that acted like a cushion around a request, and over the years I had learned to brace myself slightly whenever I heard it. She told me that Priya had found a job. A real one, she said, with emphasis, as if this was a thing worth celebrating with champagne. The job was on the other side of the city, about 40 minutes away by car, and there was no direct bus route that would get Priya there on time. She needed a C. R, my mother explained. And since Priya's credit history was, in her carefully chosen words, not the strongest right now, the car dealership was asking for a cosigner on the loan. I knew exactly what was coming before she finished the sentence. She wanted me to cosign. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear and felt that old familiar feeling rise up in my chest. It was not quite anger and not quite sadness. It was more like the feeling of someone slowly letting the air out of something you had spent a long time inflating. I knew what cosigning meant. I worked in logistics and spent my days managing contracts and liability and numbers. I understood very clearly that cosigning a loan meant that if Priya missed payments, I was responsible. It meant her financial behavior would directly affect my credit score. It meant that any bank or lender looking at my record would see that loan attached to my name. I said I would think about it. My mother said Priya needed an answer soon, because the job started in 10 days. 3 days later, I had a long phone call with Priya herself. She sounded motivated. She told me about the job, a customer service supervisor position at a mid-level retail company, with real hours and real pay. She talked about how much this meant to her. She said she was ready to be responsible this time. She said she just needed this one break, and she would pay every single payment herself, and I would never even notice my name was on the loan. She sounded like she meant it. I wanted to believe she meant it. I should tell you something important about myself here. I have always had a hard time saying no to people I love when they are asking for something they genuinely seem to need. Not because I am a pushover, but because I am the kind of person who imagines the version of the story where I said no, and someone I care about suffered for it. I carry that imagined guilt more easily than I should. It is a pattern I have worked to understand about myself, and it is the pattern that made what happened next possible. I said yes. I cosigned the loan for a 4-year-old compact sedan. The monthly payments were manageable, around $310. Priya promised to handle every payment herself. I told her clearly, more than once, that missing payments would hurt my credit score and that I needed her to be serious about this. She said she understood. She said she was serious. We shook on it in my parents' living room while my mother watched and smiled like this was a lovely family moment. For the first 3 months, everything seemed fine. Then Priya missed a payment. She told me it was just 1 month, a little tight because of an unexpected expense, and she would double up next month. I paid it myself because I did not want the mark on my credit. I told her what I had done. She thanked me and said it would not happen again. 2 months later, she was late again. This time I found out not because she told me, but because I got an alert from my credit monitoring service. A late payment notification. My score dipped. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed and enough that it stung, because I had spent years keeping that score spotless. I called Priya. She apologized. She said work had been stressful and money had been tight and she was going to sort it out. I asked her if she was still at the job. She paused for just a second too long before saying yes. That pause should have told me something. By month 6, I was making the payments myself almost every month. Not because I offered to, but because Priya would tell me she was short and I would feel that imagined guilt again, and I would cover it and tell myself it was temporary. My savings account, which I had worked so hard to build, started to shrink in small but real ways. I was not bleeding out, but I was losing blood. And nobody in my family seemed to notice, or if they did not say anything. Here is the part that made it worse. My parents knew I was helping cover the payments. My mother knew because I had told her once, calmly, that I was stepping in sometimes and that I hoped Priya would stabilize soon. My mother had nodded and said that I was so good to help and that it would all work out. She did not offer to help. She did not talk to Priya seriously about the situation. She just thanked me and moved on. My father, who was generally quieter about family financial matters, said something about how family helps family and left it there. I felt during that period something I can only describe as invisible. I was doing real things with real money and real consequences, and the people around me treated it as if it were simply the natural order. Lousia helps. Lousia manages. Lousia handles it. That is just what Lousia does. Now I need to tell you about the work situation, because that is where the real damage happened. About 8 months after I cosigned the loan, A new general manager was brought into my company. His name was not I. Important, but his management style was. He was the kind of person who believed that a team member's personal stability reflected their professional judgment. He had a specific thing about financial reliability. He had once, during a team meeting, said something offhand about how people who could not manage their own numbers made him nervous about managing the company's numbers. It was an odd thing to say out loud, but it told me exactly who he was. 3 months after he arrived, the company went through a round of performance and background reviews that included credit checks for certain roles, specifically for anyone who handled contracts, vendor accounts, or financial approvals. My role fell into that category because I managed vendor coordination and invoice approvals as part of my job. When my credit report came back, the late payment flags were there. Not catastrophic, but visible. And in the context of this new manager's particular sensitivities, visible was enough. He pulled me into a private meeting and asked me about the marks. I explained the situation honestly. I told him about the cosine, about my sister's inconsistent payments, about the steps I was taking to manage it. He listened with a polite but closed expression. He said he appreciated my honesty. He said he would keep the information in context. 2 weeks later, I was called into HR. My role was being restructured, they said. The new management team was redistributing certain responsibilities. My position would be significantly changed, effectively demoted in both title and pay. I had the option to accept the new terms or to resign with a standard severance package. I sat in that HR office and felt the floor shift under me. I knew exactly what had happened. The credit flags had not caused a termination on paper, because that would have been a legal issue. Instead, they had triggered a restructure that accomplished the same thing in a cleaner way. I was being pushed out without being pushed, which is a particular kind of cruelty because it does not even leave you with the satisfaction of a clear reason to be angry. I asked for a few days to consider. I went home that night and I did not call my family. I sat with Derek and I cried and I told him everything and he held my hand and did not try to fix it, which was exactly what I needed. I spent 2 days thinking clearly. I talked to a friend who worked in employment law, not as a formal consultation, but just to understand my options. She told me I could potentially push back on the restructuring if I could show it was retaliatory or discriminatory. But the practical reality was that these situations were hard to prove and expensive to fight, and would likely drag on for a long time even if I was right. She said sometimes the harder but cleaner choice was to take the severance and rebuild. I took the severance. I resigned on a Thursday morning, packed my desk things into that same box I mentioned at the start of this story, walked to my car, and called my mother. She asked me if I had remembered to send Priya the insurance card. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after that call ended. Here is what I want you to understand about the next part of this story. What came after was not just about a job. It was about a pattern becoming undeniable. It was about proof arriving in a sequence so clear that I finally could not look away from it. Within 2 weeks of losing my job, I had to make careful decisions about my expenses. I was living off my savings and my severance, applying for new positions, and managing my budget tightly. I stopped covering Priya's car payments. I sent her a clear and simple message explaining that I was no longer employed, that my finances were under serious pressure, and that she needed to take full responsibility for her own loan payments immediately. I said this without anger. I said it as a fact. Priya responded with a string of messages that started with sympathy and ended with a request. She said she was so sorry about my job, which took up about 2 sentences, and then spent 3 paragraphs explaining that she was also going through a hard time and really needed me to cover just 1 more month while she sorted things out. I did not reply. The next message came from my mother. It said that Priya was really struggling and that I should understand that family comes first, especially in hard times. I read that message 3 times. Family comes first. I had just lost my job partly because of a financial entanglement I entered into for family. I was sitting in my apartment with a shrinking savings account because I had spent months covering payments I was never supposed to be making. And the message I was getting was that I should do more. I put my phone down and did not respond that day. I want to tell you about a specific evening about 3 weeks after I lost my job, because it matters. I was at my parents' house for a Sunday dinner. I had come because I thought being around family might help my mood a little, which was perhaps naive of me. Priya was there. She was wearing a new jacket that I recognized as something she had mentioned wanting for several months. Priya noticed that I noticed, because Priya was more observant than she let on, and she quickly said a friend had gifted it to her. I did not say anything. During dinner, my father brought up the topic of the car loan. He said he thought it would be good for us to discuss it as a family and figure out a plan. I thought this was reasonable. I thought this meant they were going to talk to Priya seriously about taking over her own financial responsibility. Instead, what happened was that my father suggested I should continue covering the payments temporarily while Priya got stabilized, and that the family would keep track of it and figure out repayment later. My mother nodded. Priya looked at her plate. I asked, very calmly, how long temporarily meant. Nobody had a clear answer. I asked, still calmly, whether anyone had a concrete plan for when and how Priya would take full ownership of her own loan. My father said things like this take time, and I needed to be patient. My mother said that I had always been the strong one, and that strength meant helping when you could. Priya said nothing. I looked around that dinner table at the three of them and felt something shift in me. It was not dramatic. It was quiet. It was the feeling of a long-running equation finally arriving at its answer. I had been the strong one my whole life, not because I was given strength, but because I was given no other option. And the reward for my strength was that it was simply expected to continue indefinitely, while everyone else's softness was accommodated and protected. I put my fork down. I said, in a clear and even voice, that I would not be making any more payments on the car loan. I said that I had already made many payments I was never supposed to make, that I had done so because I cared about my family and my own credit, and that I had now reached the point where continuing to do so was not something I was willing or financially able to do. I said I was sorry if that created difficulty, but that I was also dealing with real difficulty of my own, and I needed to take care of myself. The table went quiet. Then my mother said I was being selfish. I picked up my glass of water, finished it, said good night, and left. I drove home in a strange calm, not numb but clear, like the air after a storm. For the next 2 weeks, the calls and messages came in waves. My mother called twice a day sometimes. My father sent longer messages that were quieter in tone, but carried the same pressure. The idea that I was letting the family down, that I was abandoning my sister, that a missed car payment would ruin Priya's life, and if I just held on a little longer, everything would be okay. My aunt, my mother's older sister, even called me once to say she had heard things were tense, and she hoped I would think about what really mattered. I responded to some of these, not all of them. When I did respond, I was calm and brief. I said I was taking care of myself and that I had made my decision. I did not argue. I did not justify in long paragraphs. I simply held the line. The loan did fall behind. There were 2 missed payments. My credit score took another hit, which was painful and frustrating, but I had begun the process of documenting everything related to the Cosigned situation and exploring whether I had any formal options. A real consultation with an attorney confirmed that I had limited recourse in the short term without going to court, which was not something I had the energy or resources to pursue at that moment. What I could do was start keeping records of everything. I kept records of everything. During this same period, I had started job hunting in earnest. I had a good resume, real experience, and strong references from colleagues who respected my work. Within about 6 weeks of starting my search, I had several interviews. Some moved fast, some moved slowly. I put my energy into the search and let the family noise exist in the background without letting it take up the center of my attention. Derek was steady throughout this time. He helped me with my resume. He kept evenings light when I needed them light. He did not pretend nothing was happening, but he also did not allow my stress to become the whole shape of our relationship. That balance kept me sane. I also had a friend, a woman named Cora who I had known since college, who was one of the people I called when things got hard. Cora had a very clear eye for patterns. She was the one who, during a long phone call about 5 weeks into this whole situation, said something to me that I have thought about many times since. She said that the people asking you to keep going have no idea how far you have already come on this road. She was right. They did not see the months of payments. They did know. See the job I had lost. They did not see the savings I had spent. They only saw the moment I stopped. Here is where the story takes its next turn. About 7 weeks after losing my job, I received an offer. A good one. A senior operations manager position at a larger company, the kind of company where the title and the pay both reflected genuine professional growth. The salary was meaningfully higher than what I had been earning before. The role was a clear step forward, not just a lateral replacement. I accepted it. I did not tell my family immediately. I told Derek first. We went out to dinner to celebrate, and I allowed myself to feel genuinely happy for one whole evening without also worrying about anything else. I told Cora the next day. She was thrilled. I waited about a week before mentioning it casually to my parents. I said I had found a new job, and it was going well and I was settling in. My mother said that was good to hear and hoped things would now calm down. She did not ask about the role. She did not ask about the company. She did not ask what this meant for my career. Within 3 minutes of that conversation, she circled back to ask whether I might be in a better position now to help with the car situation. I said I was focused on getting started in my new role and would talk to her later. I hung up and sat quietly for a moment. There is something particular about being seen only in terms of what you can provide. It is its own kind of loneliness. I had just told my mother I had recovered from a devastating professional setback and was moving into a better position than I had been before, and her immediate response was whether this improvement could benefit my sister. Not one moment of genuine celebration. Not one expression of relief for me as a person. Just a pivot back to resource extraction. I want to take a moment here to explain something about how I was changing during this period, because it matters to the rest of the story. I was not becoming cold. I was not building walls made of bitterness. I was doing something more specific than that. I was becoming clearer. I was learning to see my own history with my family without the soft filters I had always applied, the ones that translated use as love and extraction as need and invisible expectations as simply how families work. I was taking those filters off, one at a time, and looking at the actual shape of what had been happening for years. And the actual shape was this. I had been the family's financial and emotional cushion for most of my adult life. When I had something, it was quietly expected to be available. When someone else struggled, I was quietly expected to absorb the impact. And when I struggled, which happened less often because I was careful and disciplined, the response was a brief acknowledgement followed quickly by a redirection toward what I could still provide. This is not the story of a family that hated me. I want to be clear about that. This is the story of a family that simply had never had to think carefully about what they were doing to me because I had never required them to. I had required them to now, and they were not responding with insight. They were responding with pressure. The pressure intensified about 3 weeks into my new job. Priya had now missed 3 payments on the car loan. The loan servicer had sent a formal notice. My credit score had dropped again. I received a letter in the mail, official and serious, outlining the delinquency and the potential next steps including repossession if payments were not restored. I photographed the letter and saved it carefully. Then something happened that I did not expect. Priya was evicted from her apartment. I found this out not from Priya, but from my mother, who called me in what can only be described as a controlled panic. She explained that Priya had not been paying her rent fully for the past few months, that her landlord had finally filed, and the process had moved quickly, and that Priya now needed somewhere to stay immediately. And my mother asked if Priya could move in with me. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I had lost my job in part because of my involvement in Priya's finances. I had spent months covering payments I never agreed to cover. My credit score had been damaged. I had used a significant portion of my savings as a result. And now, the request was that I should also open my home. I said no. My mother did not accept this answer gracefully. She said I had the space, which was not really true because my apartment was a one-bedroom. She said it would only be for a short time, which was a phrase I had heard before in other contexts and had learned to treat with skepticism. She said that Priya had nowhere to go, as if my saying no made me the cause of Priya's situation rather than one more person being asked to absorb its consequences. I said no again. I said it without cruelty, without a lecture, and without a lengthy explanation. I simply said this was not something I was able to do. Priya ended up moving back into my parents' house. My parents had the room. What they did not have was a reason to insist I was the solution. But the consequence of my refusal was real and immediate in terms of family atmosphere. I became, quite openly, the difficult one. The one who was not being a team player. The one who was, as my mother put it in one phone call that I remember very clearly, choosing herself over her family. I remember that specific phrase, choosing herself over her family. I have thought about it many times since. What my mother meant as a criticism, I eventually came to hear as a description of something reasonable and necessary. Yes, I was choosing myself, because I was the only one available to choose me, and if I did not, there would be nothing of me left. This brings me to the part of the story where things shifted again, because up until now, I had been on the defensive. I had been holding boundaries and absorbing pressure and protecting what I could. But I was about to become more proactive, not out of revenge exactly, but out of clarity and self-protection. 3 weeks after Priya moved back home, I consulted formally with an attorney who specialized in consumer credit and cosigning situations. I explained the full timeline. I explained every payment I had made. I had documentation for all of it. Bank statements, transfer records, text messages between me and Priya where she confirmed receipt, messages from my mother confirming she knew I was covering costs. The attorney reviewed the picture and gave me clear information. She told me that my strongest immediate option was to formally demand that Priya either refinance the loan in her own name or sell the vehicle. Because I was a cosigner, I was legally entitled to make this demand and to pursue it through proper channels. She also told me that the documented payments I had made on Priya's behalf could potentially be recovered as a debt owed to me, though that was a harder fight. She helped me draft a formal written letter to Priya and a copy to my parents, outlining my legal position as cosigner, my documented financial contributions, and my demand that the loan be resolved within 60 days through either refinancing or sale of the vehicle. We sent those letters by certified mail. I want to tell you about the day those letters arrived, because Cora described it to me later, and I still think about it. She had heard from a mutual friend who knew my family that the arrival of the certified letters caused something close to a crisis at my parents' house. My mother called Cora in a panic, apparently not realizing how close Cora and I were or expecting Cora to sympathize. My mother said that I had sent a legal letter to my own sister, and that this was an attack on the family, and that she could not understand how things had gotten so bad. Cora listened politely and then said, quietly but firmly, that from what she knew, Lousia had been absorbing costs and consequences for a long time, and that a formal letter was a reasonable response to a situation that had not been handled reasonably. My mother hung up. Cora called me right after and told me the whole story, and I sat with it for a long time. Here is something important about what the letter accomplished. Not in a legal sense, but in a relational one. The letter forced everyone to stop pretending. Up until that letter arrived, the family narrative had been that this was a small financial difficulty that Lousia was making unnecessarily complicated by not being more patient. The letter took that narrative and held it up to a light. It said, clearly and in documented language, here is a timeline. Here is what happened. Here is what was promised. Here is what was not delivered. Here is what the law says. You cannot argue sentiment against a timeline. My father called me the day after the letters arrived. He did not yell. My father rarely yelled. He used a quieter form of pressure, the slow, heavy disappointment voice that I had heard since childhood, and that used to make me fold almost immediately. He said he was very troubled by what had happened. He said he felt I had gone too far. He said that in his family, in the family he had grown up in, people did not send legal letters to each other. He said this had caused a great deal of pain. I let him finish. Then I said, respectfully, that I had spent months causing no waves while real damage was done to my finances and my career, and that I needed to protect myself, and that the letter was a reasonable and legal step in that direction. I said I was sorry it caused pain, but that the situation itself had caused me significant pain, and I had not received the same acknowledgement for that. There was a long silence. He said he would talk to Priya. I said I hoped that would lead somewhere productive. We ended the call without resolution, but without war. That felt like something. Priya did know. T responded to the letter directly for about 10 days. Then she sent me a message, not formal, a long, emotional message that moved through several phases. It started with hurt, expressing that she felt I had treated her like a stranger by sending a lawyer's letter. It moved into explanation, describing her financial situation in detail, listing all the difficult things she was managing. It ended with a suggestion that if I had just been a little more patient, things would have worked themselves out naturally. I read the message twice. Then I responded, calmly, briefly, and without anger. I said I understood she was going through difficulty. I said I had also been going through difficulty, and I described it plainly. I said I had documented more than a year of financial contributions that were not part of our original agreement. I said I was not asking her to be punished. I was asking her to take responsibility for her own loan, which she had always been the primary obligator on. I said if she could refinance in her name alone, the letter's requirements would be met, and we could move forward cleanly. She did not reply for another week. During this time, my new job was going well, genuinely well. I had settled into the role quickly because my experience was solid, and I was the kind of person who absorbs new information fast. My manager had already said positive things about my contributions in a team meeting. The team I was part of was professional and functional, and the difference from my previous environment was something I noticed every single day. My personal savings were beginning to recover. Slowly, but the direction had reversed. I was paying my own bills, covering my own expenses, and not hemorrhaging money into someone else's situation. Derek and I had our best months during this period, not because everything was easy, but because I was more present, less depleted. When you stop spending your emotional and financial energy trying to manage someone else's survival, you discover that you actually have quite a lot of yourself to give to the people and things that are genuinely yours. We found an apartment together. A real one, a 2-bedroom in a part of the city we both liked, with enough space for us to feel settled rather than squeezed. We moved in on a Saturday morning with help from Cora and a friend of Derek's, and I stood in the middle of the empty living room before the boxes arrived and felt something I recognized as real, uncomplicated happiness. I had not felt that in a while. About 6 weeks after the certified letters went out, Priya's situation became more urgent in a way that pushed the car issue to a head. The vehicle had now accumulated enough missed payments that the loan servicer had formally initiated the repossession process. I received official notification as cosigner. I called my attorney. She confirmed that at this stage, the cleanest resolution was either for Priya to bring the loan current and immediately begin refinancing, or to voluntarily surrender the vehicle and settle what was owed. A repossession appearing on my credit record would be more damaging than a voluntary surrender, so timing mattered. I sent Priya and my parents a clear, simple message explaining the situation. Not emotional, just factual. The repossession process had started. A voluntary surrender would limit the credit damage for both of us. Priya needed to act within a specific short window. For 2 days, I got no response. Then my father called. His voice was different this time. The heavy disappointment pressure was gone. What was in its place was something I had not really heard from him before, a kind of plainness. He said he had sat down with Priya and gone through the numbers. He said he now understood more clearly what had happened over the past year and a half. He said he was sorry that it had gone this far without them taking it more seriously. I sat with that apology for a moment. It was not a big apology. It did not come with a speech, but it was real, and for my father, real was significant. He said they were going to use some of their savings to bring the loan current, and that Priya had agreed to surrender the vehicle voluntarily once the immediate delinquency was resolved. He said they were also going to work on having the loan closed out in a way that limited the ongoing damage to my credit. I thanked him. I meant it. He said he also wanted to be honest with me. He said he thought they had, over the years, relied on me in ways that were not fair. He said it not like a grand reckoning, more like a quiet admission from a man who had looked at a spreadsheet of payments and finally seen something he had been avoiding. He said he hoped we could have a real conversation about it at some point. I said yes. I said I would like that. I cried after that call, not from sadness, from something more complicated, from the relief of being seen, even partially, even after the damage, from the recognition thaw. It was possible for people to look at the truth and acknowledge it, even if they took a long time to get there. The vehicle was voluntarily surrendered the following week. The loan was officially closed 2 weeks after that. The formal entries on my credit report were still there, but the active liability was gone. My attorney confirmed everything was resolved in a documentable and final way. My credit recovery started immediately. It would take time to fully rebuild, but the bleeding had stopped and the direction was clear. Now I want to tell you about what happened next, because this is where the story shifts into the territory that most of the people in my life would call the turning point, and what I would call the natural consequence of everything that had happened coming full circle. About 4 months after the car situation was fully resolved, my company announced an expansion. We were opening 2 new regional offices, and there was a strong internal candidate process for leadership roles in those offices. My manager put my name forward directly. This was not something I asked for. It was a recognition based entirely on the work I had been doing since joining the team. I went through the internal interview process, which was competitive but straightforward, and I was selected to lead one of the new regional offices. The promotion came with a significant title change, a meaningful salary increase, and a level of professional standing that I had honestly not expected to reach quite this quickly. I told Derek first. We sat in our kitchen in the apartment we had made into a real home, and he held my face in his hands and said he was so proud of me, and I believed every word of it. I told Cora, who screamed loudly enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I thought carefully about when and how to tell my family. I called my father first, which felt right given our last real conversation. He sounded genuinely pleased. He asked questions about the role, about what it involved, about what it meant for my career. He was present in the conversation in a way he had not always been with news about my life. It was not perfect, but it was real, and I received it as such. My mother called me later that same day, which told me my father had told her. Her voice had that warm quality again, but this time it sat differently because what she said first was that she was happy for me and proud of me. She said it simply, and I believe she meant it. She did not pivot immediately. She did not redirect to what this might mean for anyone else. After a pause, she did say something about hoping things could be better between all of us going forward. I said I hoped so too. We talked for a few more minutes, and it was not the most comfortable conversation I have ever had. But it was honest, and honesty from my mother on the topic of our family dynamics was not something I took for granted. Priya sent me a message 2 days later. She said she had heard about the promotion and that she was glad for me. She said she had been thinking a lot about the past year, and she knew she had put me in a difficult position, and she was sorry for the way things had gone. She said she had been working with someone to help her understand her patterns around money and responsibility, and that she was trying to do better. I read that message several times. I did not respond immediately. I needed to sit with it, to think about what I actually wanted to say rather than what I reflexively felt I should say. After 2 days, I wrote back. I told her I appreciated her saying that. I told her it had been a genuinely hard year, and that what happened had caused real damage, not just financial but personal and professional. I said I was not interested in staying in a place of anger, because that was not who I was, but I also needed to be honest that trust took time to rebuild, and that I would be moving more carefully in the future. I wished her well with the work she said she was doing. I said I hoped she found the stability she was working toward. It was not a warm reconciliation. It was not a cold rejection. It was something in between, honest and measured, which felt exactly right. Several months passed. My new role was everything the promotion promised it would be. I was building something real, leading a team, solving problems at a level that felt genuinely challenging and genuinely rewarding. The person I had been worried I would never become again, the competent, clear, forward-moving professional, was not just back. She was further ahead than she had ever been. My financial situation was stable and improving. My credit score was recovering steadily. My attorney had helped me document the full history of my Cosigned contributions, and while I had not pursued formal debt recovery against Priya, the documentation existed, and that gave me a quiet sense of control over the narrative. My relationship with Derek was the best it had ever been. We had talked seriously about the future more than once, and those conversations felt grounded and real. There was a warmth in our shared life that I had sometimes doubted I would be able to build. My relationship with my parents was in a different place than it had been, not entirely healed, not pretending that nothing had happened, but more honest. My father and I had that real conversation he had mentioned, and it had been hard and clarifying in equal measure. He acknowledged things I had needed him to acknowledge. I acknowledged things about how I had operated for years that had made it easy for the dynamic to continue the way it had. Neither of us was entirely innocent in how the family pattern had worked. What mattered was that we were both willing to look at it. My mother was slower to adjust, but she was adjusting. The relationship was different. I was no longer available in the same unlimited way I had once been, and she was slowly learning to relate to me without that assumption built in. Some days that came more naturally than others, but we were moving. Priya and I had a cautious, limited contact for a while. She was living differently, still with my parents but working consistently for the first time in years, and making her payments and her bills. The person doing her financial work had apparently helped her understand some things in a lasting way. I did not rush toward closeness with her, but I also did not close the door entirely. I watched carefully, from a reasonable distance, and let time do its work. The moment that I think about most often when I look back on this whole chapter of my life is not the moment of the promotion, though that was meaningful. It is not the moment the car loan was finally closed, though that was a relief. It is not even the moment my father said he was sorry in his quiet, plain way, though that meant more than he probably knew. The moment I think about most is that evening in my parents' driveway after the dinner where I put down my fork and said no. I sat in my car for about 20 minutes before driving home, and I remember thinking, with a clarity I had not felt in a long time, that I had just done something I had spent years being afraid to do. I had spoken the truth to the people who most expected me to stay quiet, and I had survived it. I was not destroyed. I was not abandoned. I was uncomfortable, and they were uncomfortable, and the road ahead was going to be harder before it got easier. But I was still there, still whole, still mine. That was the night Lousia stopped being what her family needed her to be and started being what she actually was. Not a resource, not a cushion, not a backup plan. Just herself, clear, honest, and strong enough to choose that. I know that some of you listening to this are in the middle of a version of this story right now. You are in the part where you are still absorbing, still covering, still telling yourself that one more time will be different, still waiting for the people who use your kindness to one day recognize what it costs you. I know that part very well. I lived there for years. What I want to say to you is not that you should do what I did. Your situation is yours, and only you can feel its full weight and know its full shape. What I want to say is that there is a version of you on the other side of this who is not smaller for having said no. She is not colder or harder or less loving. She is just finally, genuinely, taking herself seriously. And when she does, everything around her begins to reorganize itself in response. Not all of it gets better. Some things fall away. Some relationships have to find a new shape or not survive the honesty. Some mornings you will grieve the version of the family you always hoped you had, the one that was loving in all directions, not just in the direction of what you could provide. But the mornings you will not grieve are the ones when you wake up in your own life, chosen and built and genuinely yours, and feel the quietness of a world that does not require you to shrink in order to fit into it. I wake up in that world now. I earned it one difficult choice at a time. And so can you. Lousia spent years being the strong one, until she finally understood that strength used up for people who never notice it is not strength at all. It is just a long, quiet disappearance. If any part of her story felt familiar to you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you are in your own story. Are you still in the absorbing part, still waiting to be seen, or have you already reached the moment where you put down the fork and said enough? Whatever your answer is, you are not alone in it, and this channel is here for every chapter.